Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Great. Thank you all for coming out. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk to you about one of the pillars of being a CFO. Sometimes I feel like there's more than 7, like maybe 100, but that's just me. The number one pillar, though, is to create shareholder value and to also make sure that you have a place and a workplace environment that is respectful and treats everyone fairly, and it's fun to be there. So every time I see that video, I've seen it maybe 10 or 15 times now, and it just makes me even more excited to be at CBS. We have so many good things we're working on now, and it's a pleasure to be here. I wish the market was doing a little better today. CNBC keeps saying it's China, but I think it might be because there's so many CFOs today not at their desk. So I thought maybe we should go back to work and get the market up, but we'll do that on Wednesday. So thank you, Neal.
Great, thank you, Chris. And for all of you visiting Boston, welcome to springtime in Boston. You can tell it's springtime because it's slightly above 32 degrees for a change, so we're looking forward to that. Chris, it was great fun when I was asked to be here for part of this conference, and my colleagues in the communications group at MIT all said, what on earth are you going to do with a group of 400 CFOs? And I took great joy in letting them know that you're going to be looking at 7 different pillars during the next 2 days, and that the first one was executive presence and communication. So it's clear that there's a recognition of how important communication is in the CFO role. So I'd like to start by asking you this. Sure. CFOs, of course, are expected to understand the numbers and the facts and the data. But how important are the soft skills, and how have you found that to affect your work?
Sure. It's a great question because I think it's relevant even now more than ever. And when you think about the role of CFO, you know, it's an acronym. What does it stand for? CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Forget About It Officer, right? Like no, just keep saying no and you'll be fine. But what I've actually found in my career is that it's the opposite. It's the Chief Figure It Out Officer. It really is, because we're all in our roles to really grow the company and look at where there's opportunities on the table to take it to the next level. And granted, in all different companies today, you're maybe at different life cycles in your company where it's important to preserve capital, or it's important to make sure you're investing and maximizing your investment. But the only real way you know that is if you get out and communicate across your company. So it's not just enough to have a great team and know that your debits and credits are balanced and that you have a great closing of the books, but it's also about what are the numbers telling you. What are we seeing in the past that we want to learn from? But not only that, how do you operate and move ahead looking in the front, not the rear view mirror, but the front? And sometimes it's easy to do, and sometimes it's really hard because you have to kind of read the tea leaves a little bit. And the only way you're going to do that, in my experience, is to really get out and talk to the salespeople and talk to the customers and experience the products yourself. So it's a little bit of a harder job than just doing the numbers, but if you can get to that next place to really experience your product and make a difference in how it's then coming through in your financial strategy, you'll get the results that you're looking for.
So it's seldom just the CFO. It's often about building and leading a team. Can you give us some insights about how you've accomplished that in your role?
Sure. That's a great question, too, because it is about teamwork. And interestingly enough, in I think it was the Journal, the weekend edition, there was a really interesting article, if any of you saw it, about wake-up call for grad students that the entry-level job you thought you were getting into is not the entry-level job you think. And it was a whole article about how students today are coming into jobs where, especially in the finance function or the tax function or the IT function, you're not doing entry-level jobs like, billing and that kind of stuff, because a lot of it is automated. So even for these younger grads coming in, they're finding that they have to do more to succeed right off the bat. And that's really where your teams are made up of probably all different generations of people, that you have to, as a team leader with your group, really work to make sure that you're collaborating across your team and that you're set up in a way that you have certain team members that are really operating on all cylinders and aligned with the business unit, which that really takes time.
Sure.
And it also means that you have to as the leader of your group, really look at how you're spending your time, and are you spending enough time with your team to plan, to develop goals? Because in my experience with the job, and as you all know, it's easy to get bogged down in all the day-to-day stuff you have to do, but it's also important to really take a step back and not be myopic to say, hey, I look at all these things and all these emails, take a step back. Right. What am I accomplishing this week, this month for my team? And how am I working with them to make sure that we're all working together to get to the same result?
As you're building a team, putting together a team, what are some of the qualities or characteristics that you would look for in people that were interested in working with you?
Sure. Well, it really depends on the job that's open.
Right.
So whatever job you have that's open, you want to make sure you find the right fit and the right candidate for that role. In my experience, what I've done is I do team interviews.
Okay.
So depending on the job at hand, we'll put together a cross-section of different people, a member of the team that's going to be on, a peer, me, and maybe another outside of finance function that we can then all interview the person collectively and ask our questions and see. The other critical part to me is that you have a diverse talent pool.
Right.
So in my experience, it really makes a difference if across your team you can have diversity of, the types of people, but also the types of skill set, the types of presence, the types of communication skills, that type of thing. So, what I also find sometimes with roles is if I'm not getting the right resumes or getting, I'll push HR to just say, no, this is not what I want. Mm-hmm. I need more people like this. So the more you can partner with your HR group to really give you a better cross-section of talent is important.
Sure.
The other thing I can say is, look, it's a hot job market right now. Yeah. So it's really hard to find the right people and competitively find them. So it's going to take a little bit longer. And, my approach is if I'm not really sure that I feel like it's a good bet that the job is going to work out, then I'm going to keep looking.
Okay. So I've always been under the impression that a CFO has a certain degree of authority, if for no other reason than you've got the checkbook in the organization.
It's good to have the checkbook.
So I'm
as long as there's money in the bank.
As long as there's money in the bank, yes, that's the critical thing, I suppose. So I'm curious about both your sense of authority in terms of the position, but also, are there other ways that you influence people at CBS or other places where you have been?
Sure. I think having the checkbook is both good and bad, right? It's good because you can decide where the money's going to go ultimately, and you work together across the company to figure out your budget and all that kind of stuff. However, if all you're looking at it is the black and white, here's the budget, and we got to make this, you either have the money or you don't, there's some key components to your strategy that are not going to be there. So with a significant amount of time that I spent at Showtime and now at CBS, really approach it from not just about what is it in the budget or not. If it's not in the budget, then don't spend it. But it's really about the budget being a process that kind of sets the pace for, okay, here's kind of what we think the year is going to be. Mm-hmm. So it gives us a guidepost or a bellwether of, based on the next 12 months, here's what we see. And then we're constantly updating our forecast on a rolling 12-month basis. But then, inordinately, you have stuff come up that's a great project, but you don't have money for it. So if you can be a flexible type of financial leader that can take a look at that and say, hey, you know what, that's a great project. If we do that, it's going to make the revenue really grow. And then you can look and reprioritize. You know what, we were going to do that, but let's not do that this year. Let's do it next year. So if you can be that person in your company that is collaboratively bringing all the opportunities together and figuring out a way to fund them, you're going to be much more successful in the goals for the company.
So I'd like to follow up a little bit more on that particular point. I'm sure you often get more requests than it is possible to fund,
yes,
or
always.
Where budgets are available.
Yeah, I've never had the conversation, hey, I have money to give back.
I'm sure not.
Has anybody had that conversation?
So I'm curious how you do manage to try to keep everybody as happy as you can.
You can't. I mean, you're never going to make everybody happy. And to me, that's why it's also important, to the extent you can, to have finance and strategy together.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not always possible, and there's reasons to keep it as two separate functions. But both at Showtime and at CBS, I have strategy as a part of my role. And when you're part of the strategic planning and you're working across the business units to really understand what they see ahead, because for certain growth types of businesses that have explosive opportunity in front of them, if you're basing on what you saw in the actuals the last 6 months, you're missing the boat. So from the standpoint of really getting close to the strategic plan of your company and helping to shape it, because you know what you can afford and what you can't, you have to address that. The other thing I'll say is that it's really important to have risk assessment. So at any point in time, you know the debits and credits of your company and how it operates. But looking at the R&Os and sort of what's coming up in the future and being able to put some kind of probability or weighting on it to really assess, should we take this risk or not? It's important to get into a mode of doing like smart risk taking, where it's calculated, as opposed to it's too risky, I'm not going to do it, or hey, let's just spend everything. It's like a medium that you have to find within your company, how you operate.
Can you share with us a risk that you took that paid off?
I can. It's a good question. The one thing that comes to mind is actually when I first took over as CFO at Showtime, we had an opportunity to do a deal with Mayweather, a multi-fight deal with Floyd Mayweather that was hugely expensive. So I came in, I was week 2 on the job at Showtime, and we saw this as an unprecedented opportunity. So we really had to go in and meet with all the constituents, CBS corporate, a lot of different people, just to get buy-in and take the risk. And so it was a calculated risk in that we knew at that time with Showtime it was the right time to really enter more into boxing and try to take and claim the stake to become the #1 boxing network. But it required a lot of communication across different business types to really get everybody comfortable with taking the risk, because boxing, is not risk-free by any means, right? So we took the leap, we did it, we entered into the agreement, and that propelled us and put us on our way to really become, now Showtime is the #1 boxing network. So that was an awesome accomplishment. But that, as an example, it's also another good example that if along the way we would have saw, hey, this isn't working out, we had milestones along the way that we could have changed course.
Okay. So it sounds like for you it's also very important to really build and develop meaningful relationships within and perhaps even external to the organization. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think on the relationship development side, it's not just about, I have to do this, let me go talk to somebody and get the job done. Especially if you're in a senior role as a financial leader in your company, whether it's tax or IT or finance or strategy or anything, you're actually in a unique spot that's somewhat a little bit like Switzerland, where you don't have an agenda per se. If you're in sales, your agenda is, let me do this to make sure I maximize my commission. If you're in your product development, or in my role, my world, content creation, you have an agenda to do the best, to make the best product you can. But in the CEO, the CFO, these sort of functional roles, you are at a place where you're seeing everything in the business.
Right.
So it's really important that you don't just sort of take that for granted, that you lean into it and you develop those relationships with sales. You develop the relationships with the product people. You develop the relationships with your customers, which the customer is the key part that's going to drive your business and take it to the next level. So if you're not taking some time to really step out of your role and look at where the revenue top line growth is coming from and could come from, then that's a critical element in your role that you're not doing.
Okay. So it may be a little surprising, but I often find in the realm of communication that one of the most important skills is good active listening.
Yes.
Have you found that to be important in your role as a CFO, and could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. A funny story that when I was early on in my career, I started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers, so I was an auditor by background, and I did that for about 6.5 years, and then I moved over to Showtime to take a senior role in Showtime in programming finance. 22 years ago now. That was a while ago. But I moved over to Showtime, and it was a completely different world. So when you're in consulting or when you're in auditing, and it's much busier, fast paced than when you move over to the business unit side and you actually have one company you're working with. It's more team oriented. You're working with the same team all the time, etc. So early on in my career, I had a high performing team. I had a really great team, but I was in a meeting once and someone pulled me aside and said, you don't listen. You're not listening to people. All you're doing is telling us what to do in the meetings. And I said, what do you mean? I think I listen, but it was powerful feedback to me because the person was correct. So after I then self-experienced myself in future meetings, she was absolutely right. And now I sort of took that feedback as pivotal in my career back then, and it really stuck with me and resonated with me. And so now I see the power of really making sure that across your team, everybody has a point of view and everybody has a voice. So it's really important that you're running your meetings and you're running your goal setting, et cetera, in a way that everybody has a voice, because as a team, your end result is going to be much better than if it's just you guiding it alone.
So you've mentioned the idea of, in your role, obviously you're every day dealing with the numbers and the budgets, but you've
and I
also
watch the shows.
And the shows, of course, very important, very important. But also you've talked a lot about the strategic decision making that is important.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you sort of approach the strategic decision making and how that factors into your sort of day-to-day work.
Sure. Well, I think before you even think about the strategy, I think whatever you can do in your company to really boil down to goals, right? Because goals to me are both short-term and long-term. So if you really look at your company, what are we doing and where do we want to be? I've seen goals done where there's like 25 goals and they all sound good, but they all sound like consulting gibberish, right? Yep. So you don't know what it means. But then I've also seen goals, and to me, I find it works the best where you narrow it down to the top 3 to 5 goals, both short-term goals and then top 3 to 5 long-term goals that you feel like as a company you need to do this to make sure you take it to the next level. So the KISS method, keep it simple, is important. And also I find it's really important to just have those top 1 or 2 that everybody rallies behind. Okay. So, at Showtime a few years ago, we really figured out like, hey, it's about the subscriber growth. So let's keep setting subscriber growth targets that everybody understands, whether you're marketing, whether you're sales, whether you're finance, whether you're building the programs. Right. Let's just keep it simple. Each year we want to get to this sub number or greater. And it's really galvanized the company around staying focused on how do we do that. And now at CBS, one of our biggest opportunities is in the streaming space. So from the standpoint of making sure we really keep people focused on that, our goal is to really, everything we do in the company, we're highly focused on investing in either programming and marketing, technology, or people. So those are our 3 areas of focus, and we're constantly asking ourselves if we're spending money and it's not on any of those areas, why are we spending it? What happens if we don't spend it? Yep. So it's really important that your strategy sort of drives your investment decisions. Okay.
So I know at CBS you are literally responsible for every aspect of the financial state there, from taxes to accounting to budgets to, I believe, even real estate.
Yes.
I'd be curious to know, for you, what's the most fun part of your work and what's the most challenging?
Sure. So the most fun part, I think, is the people. We're like a family at CBS, and we're all sort of been there a long time, very focused on our job, very passionate about our job. So to me, the fun part is actually getting the groups together, figuring out where are we going, and spending time just collaborating as a group. The most fun thing for me is when I'm able to promote somebody or I see somebody really have success. because I feel like as a team, we're all contributing together to make that happen. And when you look at your team development, it's about building a bench, right? So as you do your succession planning and you understand, okay, who's the next me when I'm not here? And then your team, who are the next people that are going to be in those roles? People are in your group working with you and for you for a career. So it's really important that you have the career conversation and not just the job discussion, right. Because if you are invested in people's careers, it's going to come back to you in spades because they're going to be invested in you and your goals. The most challenging part, I think, has to do with, I'm just trying to think of like what keeps me awake at night, and it's really things that are out of your control. Sure. Like there's so much keeping the checkbook that you have in your control, but you don't know what's going to happen with what's going on out there. And sometimes things happen out of control of your team that then you have to deal with. So I think the important thing with that is when something happens out of your control, that you really try to approach it from the standpoint of like, okay, what can I control? Right. And the number one thing you can control is how you respond to it, right? So in my experience, a lot of times, your character and your professionalism is tested in the tough times. It's not tested in the easy times. You just had a great quarter, everything's great. That's not tough. When you have the quarters that things seem like they're not going the way they need to, and you got to rally the group and figure out what are we going to do. Sure. The way you respond as a senior leader in your company, and again, whether it's finance, tax, IT, whatever, you're all in this together, and it's going to be much more productive if you get together and try to figure out a forward plan rather than do this. Right.
So I was delighted to see that one of the pillars in this program, again, is executive presence and communication. And we've talked a lot about executive presence in a lot of our communication courses and in other areas as well. I'm curious from your perspective of how do you think about, how would you describe the idea of executive presence, and particularly in the profession of chief financial officers, what does executive presence mean? How would we think about that?
Well, executive presence is that you think about any important mentor that you've had in your career, someone that you've been impressed with in a meeting, or someone walks into the room and you feel like, okay, they have some kind of authority that's not direct. I report to that person. Yep. And it's also not just about what's happening, in that meeting at the time. It's about investing in yourself and your development style to really feel comfortable with your level of communication, that it'll be inclusive to everybody, and also have a viewpoint. If you're going into a meeting, you should know your facts, you should be prepared, you should come in ready to speak and have a viewpoint. One of the things I see a lot with more mid-year type managers, especially people that are just coming in to lead people for the first time, they don't speak up enough in meetings. Okay. So I'll have people come to me after a meeting and say, hey, we should have did this in the meeting. And I said, why don't you should say that in the meeting? Next time I want you to talk. So then for people like that, I say, for your goal, your personal goal, I want you to say 2 things in each meeting. I don't care what they are. I want to hear you talk twice. So then, it's stressful. They're like, oh my, dear, I'm like, trust me, the more you do it. And then I've had people afterwards come and say, that was the best thing. And sometimes it also helps to go to a speakeasy. Sometimes people are just not comfortable talking in public. Right. And you see yourself on camera and you kind of, it's always hard to see yourself on camera or hear yourself talk. But you're in with people you don't know. Everybody's giving you positive, constructive criticism, and you get past the fear. So it's going to make a huge difference in your success of your career. Yep. So I have a question that is totally unrelated to being a CFO, except that you happen to be at CBS. Yes.
And this conference is happening at a perfect time because I believe we are just in the period where the networks are unveiling their new season of shows coming up this fall. Anything on CBS coming that we can't afford to miss?
Well, I can't steal the thunder of the upfront, so you'll have to read the big announcement, but It's going to be awesome. So I don't know how much you all know about CBS, but David Nevins, who is our new Chief Content Officer, now has leadership of the content across all of CBS, so CBS and Showtime, et cetera, CBS All Access. He's been working with the creative group at both CBS and Showtime. So this slate of shows is going to be his and his creative team's new slate for the season, and it's going to be awesome. The other thing I can tell you, which is not part of the upfront, but Showtime has City on a Hill coming out in June, which stars Kevin Bacon, and I've seen the pilot, and it's fantastic.
Terrific. Thanks for that preview.
What else? I could talk for an hour about our shows.
So one of the things that I think is always great is we have had more and more experience in our various positions, is that we reach a point in our career where we also then have the opportunity to perhaps offer some advice. So I know that we have a room full of very experienced and brand new CFOs and everyone in between. Thinking back over your career, what advice would you give to someone who is maybe at the early stages of becoming a CFO?
Sure. The number one thing I would say is care and like the people that you're going to work with and for, and have work for you, because the number one thing that gets me up every day, whether I was in charge of programming finance or at PwC or wherever I've been in my career, I've always been, really like supercharged to get in and go to work, and it's about the people that you work with, to me, and that's the reason I've been at CBS for so long. I've been there over 23 years, and it's the amount of inspiration I get from that is second to none. Yep. The other thing I'll say is, especially if you're a new CFO, is don't stay insular. It's great that you all are at this conference. I think the more you can get out and develop yourself and develop your softer skills is great. The other thing, I highly recommend the book by Marshall Goldsmith, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I've read that 4 or 5 times now, and every time I read it, I find out something new. So, there's a lot of good tools out there to help you with softer skill development. But, if you got to the CFO level, you're at a place where the technical is a given. You know your stuff, right? So don't stay focused on that. Let other people in your team take care of that and rise and shine and promote it from there. But what you really have to focus on, the future, and developing your skill set to the place where you're really making the strategic plan be executed across your company in a way that you have presence and you have solid and proven communication skills.
Terrific. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is the idea of work-life balance. I know your schedule is crazy on a daily and weekly basis. How do you maintain some sense of a work-life balance?
You don't. I don't look at it as work-life balance. I also don't really ascribe into the lean-in thing. I think that, I think you have to go with what works for you. To me, the way I approach it is really my life, my world is, I work at CBS, I have a family with 7 and 12-year-old boys and a basset hound, and you figure out how to do it all, right? So today I'm away in Boston, so my husband's got it covered. In 2 weeks, I already have it on my calendar that I have to go to my son's dance recital, which no matter what, I'm gonna be there. And the other critical thing is that you need to have a boss that will give you that flexibility. If you are impaired by a boss who doesn't let you breathe, get out. I'm just telling you, to me, I've had the most amazing bosses that, Joe Ionello, my current boss, very flexible, expect a lot. You got to get the work done, without a doubt. That's what you're there to do. But it's also really important because nobody's going to tell you, hey, go to your son's thing. You have to do that for yourself.
Sure.
And you're committed to your family and your outside commitments. But you have to make sure that happens for yourself. Nobody else is going to do that. But as long as you're there 110% of the time on most days, those 10 or 15 days that you can't be,
Right.
you know, people are going to understand.
Right. And part of that, again, I think goes back to the idea of really building and developing those relationships, particularly with your boss,
Correct.
as well as with your team and
But even
others.
you think about like the people on your teams, your go-to people
Right.
who are there. And I mean, my team, my controller and his group, I mean, amazing. You know, when we're at the quarter, everybody's working the weekend, they're getting it all done. But then it's like, hey, someone says, oh, hey, I have to go to this for my, okay, go. You know, I mean, but if it's somebody who's always late, you know, doesn't know when the meeting, you know, I mean, those types of people, then to me, that's not a work-life balance thing, that's a performance issue. You know, so once you have all the right people in the group that are like the best fit and you've got a diverse type of team, then, you know, once you have that A game going on, then you can have fun, you know, and that's really the kind of environment you want to be a part of.
Absolutely, thanks. So we'd like to also take a few questions from the group as well to give you a chance to ask some things that you are interested in and that you would like to hear from Chris. So if anyone would like to ask the first question from the floor, we would be happy to entertain that. This is everyone's chance to speak up, you see. One or two comments.
Right here.
Yes, right here in the front. We'll get a microphone for you as well.
Hi, Christina, Neal. Thank you for a terrific presentation. Harry Cantor from the New York chapter. Christina, may I ask, what are some of the unique challenges that you face as a CFO and in charge of strategy, not only of a publicly traded company, but also a company that is so much in, you know, on the focus of everybody's attention, being a leading media company with CBS and Showtime?
Sure. I mean, the public company aspect adds another layer of complexity to it. But it also, what I find is it gives you a certain layer of discipline that you don't sometimes see in other non-public companies. So, you know, to me, I don't really see it as an extra lead. The discipline is important to me because I think it's really important that you know, okay, you got the quarter end, you've got to close the books, you look at the earnings release. You know, we have sort of like a well-oiled machine in place, and it's taken a while to get there. So to the extent you're doing your quarterly close and your earnings process and all that, and it feels like it's still not quite right, keep at it and get it to a place where you feel like, okay, it works and it's good, because that's also a way that you can use to spot trends and see, hey, what's going on, and that tells me something about the next quarters coming up, and what does it mean, and how is it impacting my plan for the year or 2 or 3 years ahead. You know, the other thing as a public company is it's important to always keep your eye on the pulse of what's going on in the marketplace. You know, so for CBS, we have the upfronts going on this week. There's a lot of great articles in the press. I read them all this morning. You know, I mean, you have to stay on top of what's happening in your industry because you want to really set the tone and be able to respond to it and not react. So there's a certain level of increased vigilance that needs to be there. But on the flip side, if you're a non-public company, you know, it's been a while since I've operated in those circles, but, you know, from when I have operated in those circles, there's a lack of discipline sometimes that's also, you know, maybe even more frustrating because as a finance person, you know how it should be and you have an ideal vision and it's not there. So that takes its own kind of set of work. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Other questions?
I'm Greg Olney from the Orange County chapter. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Netflix CEO, his statement. It was a few weeks ago, and he said, you are doing too well with subscriptions. I want you to do more fringe. I don't know if you've heard of this. Have you heard of this? I want you to do more fringe entertainment. Have you heard of this?
No.
Oh, okay.
Are you talking about Reed Hastings? Or?
I don't know. Actually, don't know his name. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay. Well, that actually answers that question. What are your thoughts if somebody said that? You're doing too well with subscriptions. I want you to go a different direction with some of our shows. Does that seem crazy?
For Netflix shows?
Netflix,
are you talking
yes.
about?
And somebody just raised their hand over here. Do you know what I'm talking about? No, I need some help, so. Can you?
No, I had a different question.
Oh, you had a different question. Oh. So, anyway.
What's the general sense of the question, though?
The general sense of the question is that seems like a crazy idea if you're doing too well to take some of that money and fail. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't really know what the quote was, but I mean, look, it's a highly competitive space right now. Netflix is a key player. So from the standpoint of managing your subscriptions, another key element to their strategy is subscriber growth, though. So I think part of maybe, what they're trying to do from where I sit that I see is that they just want to keep growing the subscriber base. And there's only so many ways you can do that on the traditional side. There's only so many dramas and stuff you can put out. So you have to start to venture into other types of programming, other types of content. And as the consumer evolves and the content consumer evolves, we're going to learn from that, and we're going to see, oh, they like this, oh, they like that. I mean, the streaming consumer today is not the streaming consumer of tomorrow. Right. I mean, I look at my 12-year-old son and my 7-year-old son, and they're like this. They have a big TV sitting in front of them, but they got the little phone, right? So, and for them, it's all about YouTube and it's all about Netflix, and they live in a different world. I am proud to say, though, that a few years ago, my 12-year-old who was 10, he's a big basketball fan, and I got up in the morning, he was doing his picks, he had the newspaper out, he had the computer up with the picks on the computer, he had ESPN on, he had all this stuff. I'm like, Lee, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing my picks. And I said, okay. He's like, I got to get him to daddy. So he does his picks, and then hands them in, and I said, Lee, what do you have going on after school? He's like, no, I don't have anything going on, Mom. I got to come back and watch CBS. All the good basketball games are on CBS. And so I stopped him and I said, Lee, how do you know? Because I work at CBS. I'm like, how do you know that? He said, Mom, everybody knows that. So branding is critical. Yeah. Branding really resonates with the consumers, and so that's a big part of our strategy is really not just having that must-have content, but also staying laser focused on the building of the brands.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, right over here. Another mic.
I think it's here, on the other side.
Oh, we have.
Oh, hi.
The lights make it a little hard to see who's got.
Christina, Ed Stelmach, Atsuka Pharmaceuticals, Princeton, New Jersey. So thank you very much for your insights. I have a question for you. What proportion of your time do you actually spend in the business, running the business, influencing how decisions are made, versus on the more traditional finance side? And the second part of the question is, what does that look like?
Sorry, the second part is what?
What does that look like, being involved in the business and helping to manage?
What does it look like?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm actually, it's interesting. I was just interviewed for our newsletter at CBS, and they asked me that same question, like, what do you do with your time during your day? And I was actually, when I really reflected on it, surprised at how little time I actually spend in my office. Which I was glad about, because when you look at the time you're spending, if you're senior in your group, you should not be spending time doing this and doing that. You need to get out and understand what's going on. So if I had to put percentages on it, I'd say maybe like 35% is spent with my direct team, just meeting with the teams and understanding and making sure everyone knows our strategy. And not telling them what to do, but just understand what challenges they're facing and how in my role can I work with IT or work with another group to help them get the progress they need. So it's really important that you delegate what you can to your groups, but that they feel that you're accessible and that you have their back. The other part, probably 40%, is spending time with all my peers and the other heads of the business units. So just spending time understanding, and I'm newer, I'm not new to CBS, but I've only been in the role about 6 months. So Showtime, since I kind of grew up with my career through Showtime, the Showtime people I have great relationships with, but the other people across the company, I've really been spending time to get to know what they do, how the business operates, and as I get more experience in my role, I don't really see that changing, because the challenges evolve and change, and the pulse of the consumer changes. So it's really important that you stay on the pulse of what is driving your revenue, whatever that is. For me, it's, the consumer, but for other companies, it might be, sales of products or growing into a new type of product. So that's important.
And we often, by the way, as we think about different aspects of leadership, one of the characteristics that we talk about is this whole notion of sense making. And often I think people think that's something that is important the first maybe 2 or 3 months that you're in a new position. I would suggest it's actually very important consistently in terms of understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
Indeed. Question over here, yes.
Wilson from Houston.
Hi, Frank.
I want to take you back to your earlier comments about following trends. I have a 16-year-old daughter who recently told me, Dad, television is over.
Oh.
And then I thought about my viewing habits, and I recalled that, I just can't do commercials. I just can't do it. So I don't watch that much TV, but could you talk a little bit about my 16-year-old's view of the television and media landscape?
Well, I don't think it's dead. So we're approaching a $16 billion revenue company, so it's not dead. But I do think from a generational standpoint, the way younger consumers consume the content now is different. And so you even think about your daughter, if she likes sports, or, there are a few things that still command that live audience. The Super Bowl, sure, she watches it at the Super Bowl party, right? So there's a few last bastions of live TV events, that are out there that still draw a crowd. The other thing I'll say to that is that, your daughter isn't wrong, but if you think about how scattered and fragmented the media industry marketplace is right now, there's so many different places you can go that advertisers who really want to get their product across really look at the power of CBS and our engagement and reach with the customer that they can't find anywhere else in a brand safe environment, because sometimes the internet is not that, has a premium that we command. So our key goal is to really continue to be the #1 network out there. And the way that we're approaching our investment and our content creation, we're at a place where I'm really proud to say that we are the #1 network for the past 16 out of the 17 years. And even this year, we can say that with or without the Super Bowl.
I appreciate your mentioning the Super Bowl, by the way, and just want to...
Patriots. Good job, guys.
Just really want to thank CBS in their promotional video to have that one picture of touchdown New England. Very nice to hear.
Another funny Super Bowl thing, you guys will laugh at this, is Tony Romo is a key contributor to CBS. So right around the Super Bowl, the Wall Street Journal had this big article out about how he's such a reliable predictor of what's going to happen and all his plays. And the Wall Street Journal actually went and did this study where they looked back to all the network footage and saw, okay, he predicted this and did it happen? And the Wall Street Journal calculated that he was right like 76% of the time or something like that. So then when I read that, I said to my boss, oh, maybe we should have him predict our budget. I said, but that's going to be expensive, so we could do it ourselves.
A whole new approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, probably, from the floor.
Okay, right here, if I may. I'm Bona Allen from the Atlanta chapter. We won't talk about Super Bowls, but that wasn't my question. So I'm in the construction industry, and in my company, we found that developing and really living by mission statement, vision statement, core values, top to bottom, bottom to top, really makes an impact. And from what you just said is part of your mission statement to be #1, but then I'm assuming your core values and vision go beyond that. Could you talk about that a little bit,
Sure.
please?
I mean, yes, we enjoy being the #1 network, but to me, and this is just my opinion from where I sit, my goal for where I sit is not, okay, we got to be #1 at all costs, right? Because it's a constant balance of what you can afford to do and what you get, which is why I really think it's important that your mission statement be about your long-term plan, where do you see the growth opportunities, and keep your team and yourself focused on how you're going to drive shareholder value creation. And if you're not a public company, how are you going to drive ownership value creation, right? So from that standpoint, you want to work with your team to figure out what are those top 3 things that if you get to 2 or 3 years from now and you can check the box, we did that, that's where you want to be. You know, to me, if we have our priorities right, and some of it's a little bit of luck, obviously, yes, we have talented creative team, but you know, a little bit of luck sometimes is, hey, 10 million people saw this and they watched it and they're going to watch the next one. But you want to, you know, the #1 network is a result of the mission statement of a lot of hard work and a lot of, you know, consumer brand understanding, et cetera, a lot of years of investment. So I think it's a good question because it's not just about the result, like that should be the goal. You know, even at Showtime when I said 35 million subscribers, I mean, that wasn't our mission statement per se. It was more sort of like, okay, what are the metrics that if we can get there, that's success. So it's a really important point that, you know, your mission statement needs to be equally easy to understand, but, you know, more and more in my experience, it's really important that you've got the A team and that you've got people there that work well together and that can get the job done. I mean, even in that quote, that article that I talked about, the grad article, someone in there had a quote saying that, you know, whoever can lead without authority in the future is going to be, you know, the person that gets the job done. And the more you can approach your role from that standpoint, the more successful you're going to be.
And Chris, just a quick follow-up to that. Obviously, the CFO is going to drive the vision and mission statement for their particular area. But when you think about the broader organization, how involved should the CFO be in the sort of company's vision and mission statements?
It's a great question because you need to be highly involved. If you look at the continuum of no involvement to high involvement, you have to be here, but you can't be here as a micromanager. I told you so. I told you that wasn't going to work. No, you know, I don't have money. You need to be there, high involvement as a partner. What can I do to help? You know, and from that standpoint, again, it goes back to, do you have the right people and the right fit and the right role? Because if you do, the more collaborative you are, the more successful you're going to be. If you don't, and you feel like, you know, you don't trust the person and that you're going to have to help micromanage, then that's a sign that there's something else going on there.
Okay.
And it's hard to do, you know, it's not easy, but
no, absolutely, very challenging.
I think if you take one thing away from this, you know, whoever asked the question about the time management, you should be spending the majority of your time away from your desk.
Yeah. There's a question over here, I think. Yes? No? One more, okay.
There's a lot.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hello, my name is Jalen Santiago from Jacksonville, Florida. And Chris, I wanted to ask, with the whole team management approach, and you seem like a woman with a very busy schedule. So how do you ensure and encourage your team to come to you and to just, sorry, I wrote it down, that you're connected and not so far removed because you're not in your office a lot, or you just because of a demanding schedule? How do you still let them know that they can reach out to you and they can touch you?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's really important that with your team and anyone else who's important to keep a relationship with, that you feel that they feel you're approachable no matter what. And so I think that's where, you know, for me, I have a regular monthly team meeting. I call it the finance leadership meeting, where we all get together. Everybody can put whatever they want on the agenda. But then, you know, for people that I've worked with a long time, we just know, like, hey, we'll check in, we'll do this. But if I have someone new starting with me, I have a regular, you know, standing every week and a half or weekly, or depending on what's going on. Let's just carve out a half hour, an hour, that no matter what, we make time to get together. And that's important. And sometimes you have to reschedule, but I also really try, okay, if I have to reschedule, let's do it later in the day, or let's do it within the next 2 business days, not just skip it. But again, the other thing I have to say is that if you've been working with a group a while, is that your character and your role as a leader in the group gets tested when the times are tough. So, you know, everyone is constantly looking at what you're doing, how you're responding, what are they going to do? And the more you can lead with empathy and lead with listening and lead with, you know, understanding and not sort of be the stick that, you know, people are afraid to tell you something because they don't know what you're going to say is important. And again, it's hard to do. I mean, I seem like a pretty even-keeled person, but even I sometimes, you know, I've had some doozies where it's like all I can do to just not choke the person. But you have to really, like, you just have to remember, you know, you're in a role that's really important, that you want the flow of communication to come into you, not go away from you. And again, I say that's the same thing with IT, with tax, with finance, with any kind of function. The more that you can be on the pulse of what's going on, the better off you're going to be. You know, and it doesn't mean that you just have to be like a sieve that just take it all. You know, I mean, there's things that you can do not in the heat of the moment. If something's happening that you don't like, you know, you don't deal with it in that moment. Like if that means that you have to deal with, you know, someone who's underperforming, deal with it in a respectful way, you know, not in that heat of the moment. Or another example, if a strategy didn't go right, you know, don't talk down the person in a room full of colleagues, right? So there's a right way and a wrong way to handle it, but, you know, the number one thing is listen and really think through. The only thing you can really control is how you respond to things. Like that's your personal executive brand, whether as your professional, you know, work life and even in your real life, right? I mean, crazier things happen in your real life because people are at work. So, you know, just keep that in mind.
So, excellent questions. Thank you very much. One final question from up here. So, Chris, I think one of the challenges or traps, perhaps, that many of us can fall into is being in a silo, if you will.
Yes.
And what advice do you have for our CFOs here to not fall into that trap, to make sure that they are, in fact, very engaged in terms of strategy, in terms of communication, in terms of being very present throughout the organization?
Sure. Well, a couple things to that. One is, you know, I don't think it's don't ever be in a silo. I think sometimes silos are valuable, you know, and I think any decision you have that you have to make that's like, how important is support and involvement around this decision is a key strategy thing, then it's all hands on deck. You know, if it's, I got to get this entry right and I only have 2 hours, then you got to be in your silo with your controller or whoever and do it, right? So it's not an all or nothing thing. But you can't do the whole job in a silo, no matter what job you're in. So I think it's just really, you know, two things. A, being mindful of what roles require that and what don't, and how you fit and your own personal style works with that. But then also your own personal assessment of your brand. And there's a lot of brand consultants out there now that, you know, talk about your personal brand and, you know, how you come across and things that you can do to develop yourself personally to really understand how people perceive you and all that kind of stuff. But the more you can do to have a perception that you're not in the silo and that you're actually out there doing things and you with integrity and trust, you know, that's what's going to lead to greater success.
Great, terrific. Chris, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure
Thank you, everybody.
having this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and please keep watching CBS, Showtime, CBS All Access. Now we have CBSN, ET Live, we got it all, okay? So your 16-year-old daughter, she's got a lot of content coming up. Thank you, everybody.